All right, so our second reader is the author of Bodies in Motion, The Stars Change, and 10 other titles. Bodies in Motion was a finalist for the Asian American Book Awards, a USA Today notable book, and has been translated into 6 languages. The Stars Change is a science fiction novella and finalist for the Lambda, Rainbow, and Bisexual Book Awards. Previous titles include Aqua Erotica, Wet, Catherine in the City, The Classics Professor, The Best of Strange Horizons, Without a Map, The Poet's Journey, and A Taste of Serendib, a Sri Lankan cookbook. She founded the Hugo-nominated magazine Strange Horizons, serves as executive director of the Speculative Literature Foundation, has taught at the Clarion SFF Workshop, and is clinical assistant professor of English at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Give a warm welcome to Anne Mohanraj.
I think so. All right. There we go. How's that? More? Yes? Good? Okay. All right. You know, when you do readings, like sometimes there are these odd themes that come up over and over between the readers, and you don't think that's going to happen, and you don't know why it happened. And I actually almost was going to read a story about people being set on fire. Would have been interesting, but I decided to read something else. So. I think that's good. So The Stars Change came out last year. It's science fiction. It's set in the future. We've gone out there. We've met aliens. We've been genetically modifying ourselves, so some of us look really weird. It takes place on a university planet that's been settled mostly by South Asians and Irish people, fleeing religious persecution, etc. The novel, it's a novella, it takes place at the first night of the first interstellar war. Sri Lanka, you may know, has just gone through about 30 years of civil war, starting in 1983 with the Black July riots. And one of the things I wanted to do in this book was kind of write about that without writing about it, because as someone who's been here since I was 2 years old, you know, I'm very Americanized. And so it feels a little weird writing directly about like political events happening in another country. And so it's easier if you set them in space with aliens. So that book came out. I'm now working on a follow-up novel, which I'm kind of hoping is going to be like a big, epic space series thing. So, like big fat books. So anyway, I'm going to read you the opening to that. It's brand new. I'm only halfway through writing the book. It may change radically between now and publication. All right. Chapter 1. Maya hurried through the narrow cobbled streets of Old Town, lifting her heavily embroidered sari skirts out of the muck as she went. The stars were slowly emerging, faintly visible through the shimmering screen of the dome overhead. She hadn't meant to be so late, but Professor McLeod stepped out of his office and stopped her as she was leaving her final exam. "How did it go, Miss Stewart?" The voter translated his words smoothly, shaping them into an auditory range humans could hear. His eyes were kind under those bushy green brows, and she'd been so grateful for his support over the last 3 horrible years. Between her father's illness and the intensity of med school, she didn't think she would have made it without his help. They'd all been so kind, her professors. She hoped they wouldn't think it too much a betrayal, that after all their hard work, she wasn't actually planning to practice medicine. Not anymore. "Reasonably well," she said, her voice breaking slightly. Maya took a breath and studied it. It would be embarrassing to lose control now after holding it together this long. "I think I passed." He smiled. "I'm sure you did, and with high marks, too." He bent down and took her hand, gave it a gentle fatherly squeeze. By this point, after examining so many non-human patients, she barely noticed how moist Professor McLeod's skin was. It merely registered as healthy for his species. She was going to miss treating non-humans. His brows furrowed as he said firmly, "Now, don't take the first job that comes asking. When you have all your options on the table, you come talk to me. You don't need to stay on planet. Any decent hospital will pay for your passage." Professor McLeod knew her circumstances, knew there wouldn't have been a chance of her affording a passage off-planet otherwise. Knew, too, that there weren't any close family ties keeping her here. Not anymore. "You can go anywhere you want now." If only that were true. But Maya managed to smile for him and promised that she'd bring him the details of her offers to discuss. It wasn't precisely a lie. If she didn't apply for any jobs, then there wouldn't be any offers. The whole exchange had made her late. She'd had to rush home to change and dress in the formal red and gold threaded sari, and had even considered paying the exorbitant price for a flyer to get her across town. But it was only 12 blocks. It was ridiculous not to walk. Maya probably shouldn't have sat the exam at all, but after all those years of work, she couldn't just walk away with nothing at the end. Even if no one else cared, she would be Dr. Stewart. Her father would have been proud. She walked quickly across town, trying not to be too irritated by the flyers swooping overhead. Most of them kept to the steady net control, speed, and flight plan, but there were always a few idiots who had to hack the controls to manual so they could show off. Maya had even ridden with one once in her first year of med school, when she'd just been a hick from the outcountry and hadn't known any better. He had had such lovely eyes. And, as it turned out, groping hands, even when they should have been firmly on the controls. Maya hadn't minded seeing the last of him, though she'd regretted a bit that she hadn't had a chance to try the flyer's controls. Just once. A bell started to toll, and she swore under her breath, "Ilsa's balls," and then promptly regretted the blasphemy. It's really hard coming up with future alien swears. And then promptly regretted the blasphemy. Ilsa was a minor goddess, but fertility was one of her purviews, and fertility was going to be important to Maya's future. It wouldn't do to get on Ilsa's bad side. Not that Maya really believed in Ilsa, but still, no reason to court disaster. But that bell marked the first hour of night, and she was still 2 blocks away from where she ought to be. Maya sped up as the streetlights sprang to life around her. If it weren't for their bright light, perhaps she would have missed the drama playing out in the alley ahead. Herwits were so small and quiet, even, apparently, when they were being beaten bloody. It took her a moment to make sense of what was happening. Just 2 figures, one human male, taller than she was, paler skinned, and the Herwit, half her height, a small, furry creature. The human was punching it methodically and cursing in a low voice, a foul string of curses that marked her own previous profanity as the tame creature it was, each one punctuated with a punch or a kick, and the Herwit simply huddled in, whimpering so softly Maya almost couldn't hear it, but she could see the bloodied face, the way it curved its spine, protecting its vulnerable gut. Maya didn't think. There wasn't time. She stormed into the alley, fury displacing all her prior emotions. It felt good, having a target for her righteous rage. Never mind that he was at least 6 inches taller than she was, and broader, too. She was annoyingly short, even for an unmodded woman. But right now, she felt 10 feet tall. Stop that! 2 steps took her into the alley, and the man paused in his beating, long enough for her to take 2 more steps, interposing her body between him and the Herwit. "Get out of my feckin' way," the human said. "Or what? Or I'd be happy to give you some of what he's earned. What could he possibly have done to deserve being beaten half to death? Took my job right out from under me. He walked in, offered to do the same work for 2/3 the pay. Hungry," the Herwit said in a soft voice. "I'm hungry too," the man exploded. He took a threatening step towards them, and Maya felt her pulse racing. If he really did want to fight her, she wouldn't have much chance. She'd been reasonably fit as a child, had even studied Kuserwet, but 3 years of bending over her books, alternated with nursing her dying father, had left her a plump frame and nothing in the way of combat skills. She dug in the folds of her sari, pulling out the small bag that held a few last coins, all that was left. She'd spent the rest on the necessities for today, the sari, the shoes, the gold bangles. If she hadn't had her mother's gold thali necklace, Maya didn't know what she would have done. She could never have afforded one of her own. And now she was wearing it and the bangles and felt an utter fool for standing in the street like this. She looked rich, and she hoped that this man with the bloodied knuckles wasn't actually criminal, or hadn't been before today. Hoped that he would take the coins offered, rather than rip the jewelry from a human woman's body. Maya offered them to him. "Please, take this. Buy food." It was enough for a week's groceries if one were frugal. Lentils and rice, a little chili to make it palatable. You could live for a long time on lentils and rice. She was sure the man knew that already. It was a lesson they'd all learned with the last few years of rationing. The wormhole blockades were erratic. The war seemed to conduct itself in fits and starts, and sometimes it seemed like you never quite knew who was on which side. The government stockpiled food reserves, just in case, though their planet had been relatively untouched so far, aside from that one brutal attack on the Warren 8 years ago, the one that had been so narrowly averted. Many of their alien races had fled to their home regions after the attack, the ones who could afford to leave. Space travel wasn't cheap. The human froze for an endless moment, then grabbed the money from her hand. Without another word, he walked past them, into the streetlights, leaving the two of them in the shadows of the alley. Thank you, lady." His soft, furry voice was muddied, but she'd taken care of enough of his people to parse the words easily enough. The Herewith reached toward her with one hand, and she almost took it, before remembering, suddenly, what time it was and where she had to be. Maya couldn't afford to arrive bloody, dirty. It was bad enough that she was so late. She wanted to dress his injuries, but there was no time. "The clinic will take care of you, on Iskander Road. Can you get there?" "Yes, lady." "Stay in the light, little one." He nodded and scampered off. Even with the array of bruises, she thought he'd be at work the next morning, ready to do whatever the job was for 2/3 the pay. She could understand why the man had been enraged. It was hard enough competing for work with the gene-modded without having to deal with aliens, too. And yet... No time to think of that now. She picked up her skirts and started to run. 2 blocks to the temple, and she could neaten herself up in the courtyard. If she didn't hurry, she'd miss her own wedding. She couldn't afford that. Thank you.